The Lightning Collection has had all kinds of figures. Some have themes, some just pick the most popular character of an era. And the first wave of the Lightning Collection was pretty interesting. We had Dino Charge Red, White Ranger, SPD Doggy Kruger, and Lord Zen. So it has an abundance of different characters. So I thought to myself, what kind of theme could we get from the Lightning Collection that they haven't done before? And like, what could we have as a bonus? The Lightning Collection is not really afraid of adding additional stuff if it's worth it. For example, Time Force Blue. Lucas comes with his Vector Cycle. But like, what could we add that would be unique and original in some way, that rather than just, oh, here's a cool figure here? Why don't we actually do a wave of figures focusing on the evil monsters and villains of the series that eventually turned good for one way or another? And I said, what would be the equivalent of a Power Rangers team if you had put them together? So I thought of 6 villains that have turned good for this type of theme, as well as an additional thing to give a little bit more of an incentive to pick up the figures. For example, a city background, because you know, all the Power Ranger fights happen in places, usually cities, and they're in their giant Zords and fighting, but we really don't have like a diorama or something scenic of a city or a background of some kind to recreate any of those monster fights. So I thought, what would be the equivalent of like the first of the Ranger team for a villain? And I thought of Noticon in Time Force. I think many people always remember this particular episode because it was a turning point for Eric, because again, Eric has gone through a lot of crap in his life. He was always the underdog. He always had to work hard. So whenever he, saw Wes, even though Wes was a nice person and he wasn't this stuck-up rich kid, Eric didn't really trust anyone who was rich, because again, he just sees him as he had the easy life. I have to do everything the hard way. I have to be perfect. I have to be better. And of course, with that type of motivation, which is a positive in a lot of ways, a lot of negatives come out of it, and he would just ignore, other aspects that could happen. Even when we watch Power Rangers, we tend to forget, the monsters are part of a species that are from different planets. So not all of them are going to be evil, or there's always that potential of, yes, you could be evil and you could do horrible things, and that won't excuse what you've done in the past. However, you could eventually figure out, like, this is wrong. So it was interesting to finally bring in a monster in Time Force where they had no intention of ever fighting. They just came in, and the reason why this had happened was because Noticon was really just a small fry, petty theft. It was very minor, and he didn't want to help Rancic. He didn't really do anything. And the next one I came up with was a personal favorite, was Waspicable from Power Rangers in Space. Again, it was another monster that he was evil, quote unquote. He tried to work with Astronema, but then he instantly failed because he really didn't want to harm anyone or do anything. It was a fun standalone episode for Cassie and Waspicable. Also emphasized how Astronema was back in those time periods where she didn't take kind of this bug really not doing anything and eventually turning good. Of course, it's sad because usually whenever we have the bad guy turn good, they always have to end up dying, which brings me to Loyax from Lost Galaxy. And this was a very sad episode, and one of those really good episodes for Maya. And it was because this character, who was very honorable, was kind of in the line of like Korag, where he was evil, even though he was being brainwashed at the time, but he still wouldn't cross certain boundaries. So Loyax was just like that. Yes, he wanted to, fight the Rangers, defeat them, but he didn't want to do it under the grounds of being, manipulated. It wanted to be fair game, and he wanted an honorable death, which Maya gave him. So I always wanted a figure of the character because it was just that really interesting. And Maya didn't get that many good episodes in the series. She got things here and there, but again, because she was so different in Gingaman, they didn't have all that much material they can go to. What characters would be the equivalent of the girls on the team that were turned from bad to good? And I said, one obvious choice would be Necroli. Yeah, she was evil from the very beginning. Everyone remembers the whole vampire episode with Vita and Chip. Necroli, ends up being Lily's mother, and that was a complete different departure from Maji Ranger, which was cool. I did like the the way they had developed it. It could have been better, yes, but I always found Necroli very interesting. I just wish the turn didn't happen until the end of the series, because again, it falls into the same problem. Every time we get a villain that turns good, it always ends up, they die, or if they don't die, it happens at the end of the series. So I always wanted a Necroli figure, and the next one should be a pretty obvious one, Tanaya. Dylan was just trying to, get his memories back, and eventually he figured out he had a sister, and she was just basically partially, turned into a cyborg, brainwashed, taken against her will. She's just being used to simply fight the Rangers, trying to kill them, trying to kill her brother. So it was a really, a complicated story. So I always wanted a Tanaya figure, whether in her, fully cyborg form or her standard form with her visor and whatnot. Which brings me up to who would be the equivalent of a sixth ranger of the evil to good team. And I think the only best choice would be Zen-aku. He originally was, Merrick, who got transformed into this spirit and eventually got split off from his. The Zen-aku arc in Wild Force is one of the better elements of the season, and I always enjoyed it. And I did like it at the end when Zen-aku was like, you know what, Merrick? I'm not totally good right now, but I'm at that point where I'm going to follow you and then understand what you do, and maybe I can understand maybe the positives of being a person now. Maybe, the Zen-aku mask always, was just a spirit of evil, but when Merrick was possessed, it's possible that Merrick's will of good, protecting his original team, maybe that will rubbed off on Zen-aku. Maybe it just allowed him to open up and see the world like, okay, we don't have to be complete dicks to everyone on this planet. I wish he was brought back in some capacity. It would be cool if he did, because they kind of just left him hanging and we just see Merrick going off. So yeah, I really wanted a really nice detailed figure of Zen-aku. A Lightning collection of these villains that from evil turning good, I think would be a good beginning of this type of series. I could think of other characters in the future that could be added to it, like even weirder ones like Mr. Tickle Sneezer, Itasis from Mystic Force, Latombo, characters that could add in a future line of evil to good. I think it would be unique, especially if it comes with the diorama parts to make a mini city that would probably just give you enough space to have two figures in the middle. Would some of them be more expensive? Yeah. Like if they added more detail to Zen-aku or they added a couple of extra things, they would have different versions of his weapon, flute version, the crescent wave where you can open and close it, for example. There are a lot of villains that I did like, whether they were evil or not. I did like many of them because they had really cool designs, and not many get a chance to actually be released as figures because, they're monsters of the week, so not all of them are going to be memorable. But I was like, these are the ones that I particularly enjoy. You know what? This season wasn't really as good as I hoped it was. It had a lot of issues, but this episode was really good, and I would really like to have a figure of this character. I think they would be a worthy addition to the Lightning line. It would give something unique to maybe, if they sell good and they do something like that, they can do maybe a warehouse district. They can do a, mountain area. Maybe even they can go and focus on more specific things like Terra Ventures interior, for example, and we see like the control tower or something like that. I think that the Lightning line has the potential of doing pretty much anything, and it can support itself to do all kinds of things. I would like to see Frax, for example. That would be a cool figure. The choices are endless. Now, we can't get everything. I don't expect to see every color variation of the Chromites, but it would be cool that we could, over time, get a lot of the older villains released, rather than always focusing on the classics like Goldar, Scorpina. So what do you think of my suggestions? Do you think the diorama idea is good, or do you think, maybe it's cool, but they could divert the diorama's materials to maybe adding additional stuff that involve the figures? Or what other figures would you personally want to see in the toy line versus my choice? Thanks everyone, and I'll see you guys in the next video.